Good evening. Tonight we begin with a development that has sent shockwaves through military and political circles far beyond the waters where it occurred. A single strike, a single moment, and a loss so large, so symbolic, that it cuts directly into the image Vladimir Putin has spent decades trying to project. Strength, control, deterrence. All called into question by the reported destruction of a Russian submarine valued at $1.65 billion, wiped out in what Western officials describe as a precisely executed British operation. Submarines are not just weapons. They are statements. They are designed to be unseen, unheard, and untouchable. They represent strategic patience, technological superiority, and the ability to strike without warning. For a leader like Vladimir Putin, whose power rests heavily on the perception of military dominance, losing one in a single strike is not just a battlefield setback. It is a public humiliation. According to emerging reports, the submarine was operating in a zone believed to be secure, protected by layers of intelligence, assumptions, and defensive confidence. That confidence proved misplaced. British capabilities, refined quietly over years of modernization and coordination with allies, appear to have found a vulnerability Russia did not believe existed. And once exploited, the result was immediate and irreversible. This is why the reaction from Moscow has been so carefully controlled. Official statements are vague. Language is restrained. Details are scarce. In contrast, Western defense officials have been unusually blunt, emphasizing not only the success of the operation, but what it reveals about the changing balance beneath the surface of this war, a balance where Russia's most prized assets are no longer guaranteed sanctuary. For Putin, the timing could not be worse. His authority has already been strained by a grinding war that refuses to deliver decisive victory. Sanctions continue to bite. Military losses accumulate. Confidence inside Russia's elite circles has become fragile. And now, one of the most expensive and symbolically powerful elements of Russia's navy has reportedly been erased in a single blow. The humiliation lies not only in the loss itself, but in what it signals. That British and allied forces possess the intelligence, reach, and precision to neutralize assets Russia considers untouchable. That deterrence, once assumed, is now contested. And that the Kremlin's assurances of control no longer carry the weight they once did. Submarine warfare has always been a game of shadows. Success is measured not by spectacle, but by silence. When a submarine is destroyed, that silence is broken in the most dramatic way possible. The message travels quickly, even if the details do not. Militaries take notice, allies reassess, and adversaries recalibrate. Tonight, we are going to examine what this strike means, how Britain was able to carry it out, and why its impact extends far beyond the immediate loss of hardware. Because this is not just about a submarine. It is about credibility, about deterrence, and about a Russian leader facing what makes the destruction of this submarine particularly damaging for Moscow is not simply its price tag, but the doctrine it represented. Russia's submarine fleet has long been central to its military identity. These vessels are meant to compensate for weaknesses elsewhere, to project power without visibility, and to keep adversaries guessing. They are the backbone of deterrence, the quiet threat that underwrites public bravado. When one of them is lost so decisively, that doctrine is exposed. For years, the Kremlin has invested heavily in modernizing its underwater capabilities. Advanced propulsion systems, stealth coatings, long-range cruise missiles, and layered defensive assumptions were supposed to make these submarines survivable even in contested environments. They were marketed internally as proof that Russia remained a top-tier military power despite sanctions and isolation. Losing such an asset in a single strike punctures that narrative. According to Western defense assessments, the British operation relied not on overwhelming force, but on precision and patience. This was not a chaotic engagement. It was the result of persistent surveillance, intelligence sharing, and the exploitation of a narrow window where the submarine's vulnerabilities briefly outweighed its protections. That is what makes this incident so unsettling for Russian planners. It suggests their margin for error has disappeared. Submarines are most vulnerable at specific moments. During communication checks, during navigation adjustments, during transitions between depths. These moments are brief, but they are predictable to those who understand the patterns. British naval doctrine has emphasized exactly this kind of long-term observation, waiting for opportunity rather than forcing confrontation. When the strike came, it appears to have been decisive. The Kremlin's silence on specifics is telling. Russian military culture typically celebrates resilience and downplays loss, but the absence of detailed counterclaims suggests there may be little to dispute. In contrast, British officials have allowed the story to circulate without denial, a subtle confirmation in itself. In modern conflict, what is not denied can be as meaningful as what is announced. This loss also carries operational consequences that extend beyond a single vessel. Submarines operate as part of a broader ecosystem. Their presence shapes adversary behavior even when they are unseen. When one disappears, gaps open. Patrol routes change. Defensive postures adjust. Confidence erodes. Russian naval commanders must now assume that similar vulnerabilities exist elsewhere in the fleet. For Putin, this is a strategic embarrassment layered atop political strain. He has consistently portrayed Russia's military as technologically resilient, capable of adapting despite external pressure. Yet this strike suggests that adaptation has lagged behind expectation, that British and allied forces have moved faster, integrating intelligence, technology, and coordination in ways Russia has struggled to match. The psychological impact inside Russia's military should not be underestimated. Submarine crews are elite. Their training is extensive. Their missions are high risk. Knowing that a peer adversary can neutralize them so cleanly undermines morale and trust in leadership. It raises uncomfortable questions about protection, preparedness, and the honesty of official assurances. Internationally, the message is equally stark. Britain's role in this operation reinforces its status as a serious naval power with advanced capabilities. It signals to allies that investments in maritime surveillance and precision strike pay dividends. It signals to adversaries that the undersea domain is no longer as opaque as it once was. This incident also reshapes assumptions about escalation. Submarine warfare has traditionally been seen as a shadow conflict, one where engagement is carefully managed to avoid rapid escalation. A decisive strike like this demonstrates that thresholds are shifting, that under certain conditions, high-value assets can be targeted without triggering immediate wider conflict. That calculation will now factor into every naval decision Russia makes. The loss of a $1.65 billion submarine is not easily absorbed. Financially, it represents years of investment erased in seconds. Strategically, it reduces deterrence capacity. Politically, it undermines credibility. For a leader who relies on projecting strength to maintain authority, the cumulative effect is corrosive. As details continue to emerge, what remains clear is that this was not an accident or a lucky shot. It was a demonstration of capability, of intelligence dominance, and of the shifting balance beneath the surface of modern warfare. The humiliation for Putin lies in the realization that assets once considered untouchable are now exposed. What deepens the impact of this incident is how clearly it exposes a broader shift in the balance of maritime power. For decades, Russia relied on the assumption that its undersea fleet could offset disadvantages elsewhere. Submarines offered invisibility, survivability, and strategic ambiguity. They were the insurance policy. When that insurance fails so publicly, the implications ripple outward fast. British naval doctrine has evolved around a different premise. Rather than chasing presence, it prioritizes awareness, persistent monitoring, data fusion across allies, quiet patience instead of constant movement. The reported strike fits that model precisely. It suggests an adversary that knew where to look, when to wait, and when to act. That level of coordination is not improvised. It is built over years. For Russia, this creates an immediate operational dilemma. Every remaining submarine must now assume it is being watched. Patrol patterns become liabilities. Communication windows become risks. Commanders are forced to choose between silence and coordination, between concealment and effectiveness. None of those choices are comfortable. All of them reduce operational freedom. The financial dimension compounds the damage. A $1.65 billion platform represents more than steel and electronics. It represents years of skilled labor, scarce components, and institutional focus. Replacing it is not a matter of writing a check. Sanctions have constrained access to critical technologies. Shipyards are operating under strain. Timelines stretch. Costs rise. Even an accelerated replacement would take years, not months. Politically, the strike arrives at a moment when Putin's narrative of resilience is already under pressure. He has repeatedly assured domestic audiences that Russia can absorb losses, adapt, and prevail through endurance. Yet endurance depends on confidence. And confidence depends on the belief that sacrifices are leading somewhere. High-profile losses without visible gain erode that belief. Inside Russia's elite circles, incidents like this sharpen private doubts. Naval officers, defense officials, and political insiders understand what this loss signals, even if they do not say it publicly. They recognize the asymmetry between cost and effect. They understand that deterrence is not just about weapons, but about perception. And perception is shifting. The Kremlin's controlled messaging reflects this sensitivity. Rather than denial, there is minimization. Rather than celebration of retaliation, there is silence. That restraint is itself a signal. It suggests that escalation is not straightforward, that options are constrained, and that the leadership is weighing consequences carefully. Internationally, the strike reinforces confidence among Russia's adversaries and caution among its partners. Allies see proof that coordination works. That investments in surveillance, intelligence sharing, and precision pay off. States that hedge their relationships with Moscow are reminded that Russia's military power is not as insulated as it claims. The undersea domain, once the safest sanctuary, is now contested. This recalibration affects strategic planning far beyond the immediate theater. Navies worldwide are reassessing assumptions about stealth, survivability, and deterrence. If a modern submarine can be neutralized so decisively, doctrines built around invulnerability must adapt. That adaptation favors states with superior intelligence integration and alliance networks. It disadvantages those operating in isolation. For Putin personally, the humiliation is layered. It is not just that an expensive asset was lost. It is that it was lost to a country he has repeatedly dismissed as secondary. Britain's role here undercuts years of rhetoric portraying Western European militaries as hollowed out or irrelevant. It demonstrates capability where Moscow predicted decline. The domestic consequences inside Russia are subtle but significant. Publicly, the state can control coverage. Privately, professionals notice. Sailors talk. Officers reassess. The sense that leadership understands and controls the battle space weakens. Morale does not collapse overnight, but it frays. There is also the question of deterrence stability. Submarines have long been seen as stabilizing forces precisely because they are hard to target. When that assumption erodes, so does predictability. States become more cautious, but also more anxious. Miscalculation risks rise as actors try to protect assets they once assumed were safe. For Ukraine and its supporters, the message is indirect but powerful. Pressure works. Attrition works. Exposing vulnerabilities works. You do not need to defeat an adversary everywhere to change the strategic equation. You only need to demonstrate that their most prized assets are not immune. This is why the term humiliation resonates. It is not about spectacle. It is about revelation. The revelation that power projected so confidently can be undercut quietly. That dominance assumed can be challenged precisely. And that control claimed can be lost in an instant. As the story continues to unfold, analysts will debate details, methods, timelines, attribution. Those debates matter. But the broader meaning is already clear. A line has been crossed. The undersea sanctuary is no longer guaranteed. And a leader who has built his authority on the promise of military strength must now contend with a very public contradiction. When symbols of deterrence fail, they take more than hardware with them. They take confidence. And confidence, once lost, is far harder to replace than any submarine. As the full weight of this incident settles in, what becomes clear is that this was never just about a submarine. It was about assumptions, about beliefs that had gone unchallenged for years. That certain assets were untouchable. That certain domains were safe. That certain powers could act without consequence. The destruction of a $1.65 billion Russian submarine in a single, precise strike shattered those assumptions in a way that cannot be undone. For Vladimir Putin, this moment represents a personal and political reckoning. His leadership has always depended on the projection of strength, the image of control, the suggestion that Russia's military power was deep, resilient, and beyond reach. Losing such a critical naval asset so decisively exposes the limits of that projection. It reveals a gap between image and reality that is increasingly difficult to conceal. This humiliation does not come from public spectacle or dramatic footage. It comes from silence, from the absence of denial, from the careful wording of official statements, from the quiet acknowledgement inside military and political circles that something fundamental has shifted. The most damaging losses are often the ones that force adversaries to rethink what they thought they knew. For Russia's military, the implications will linger long after headlines fade. Commanders will operate with greater caution. Patrols will be adjusted. Assumptions will be questioned. The undersea domain will feel smaller, more crowded, more dangerous. That change constrains options and slows initiative. It turns confidence into calculation. For Britain and its allies, the strike reinforces a different lesson. That patience, intelligence, and coordination matter more than sheer scale. That modern warfare rewards awareness over bravado. And that credibility is built not through constant display, but through quiet capability demonstrated at decisive moments. Internationally, this event will be studied carefully, not as an isolated incident, but as part of a broader pattern. A pattern in which traditional markers of power are being redefined. Stealth is no longer absolute. Sanctuary is no longer guaranteed. Deterrence is no longer one-sided. Those shifts will shape military planning far beyond this conflict. For Ukraine, the message is indirect but unmistakable. Pressure works. Adaptation works. Exposing vulnerabilities matters. The erosion of Russian confidence, whether on land or at sea, contributes to a broader strategic recalibration. Victory does not always arrive as a dramatic collapse. Sometimes it arrives as a slow narrowing of options. And for Putin, the path forward grows increasingly constrained. Escalation risks further exposure. Retaliation risks international consequences. Silence risks appearing weak. None of these choices restore what has been lost. The illusion of invulnerability has been punctured, and once punctured, it cannot be fully repaired. Wars are shaped as much by perception as by force. This strike altered both. It reminded the world that power claimed is not always power held, that dominance assumed can be challenged, and that even the most expensive, carefully protected symbols of strength can disappear in an instant. When that happens, the damage is measured not only in dollars or hardware, but in credibility. And credibility, once shaken, changes everything that follows. Thank you for being here. Stay informed.